In the grimdark future of the 41st millennium, libraries are not the quiet, comforting sanctuaries we might imagine. They are labyrinths of ink and paper, endless catacombs of shelves that stretch far beyond the memory of their keepers. Many contain stacks that seem to stretch onwards and upwards for miles on end, while others contain literal mountains of wax formed from the countless candles that light their hollowed halls. Many have grown so monolithic over the millennia that trying to map them out has become an impossible task. None truly know just how deep they go or what horrors have taken up residence within their forgotten sectors. There are some that believe thousands of years ago, knowledge was once freely accessible in these places. Whether or not such tales are to be believed, the Imperium of Man knows the truth. Knowledge is a weapon more dangerous than any other. To the wardens who guard it, their vigil is seen as both a sacred duty and a curse. Every scroll, record, and volume contains a weight that few can bear. Some contain prescribed truths, others heretical conjecture, while others, things far worse. Tonight's tale is titled The Stacks, written by Chris Winterton and included in the Warhammer horror anthology The Resting Places, released in 2022. If you appreciate these stories, then I encourage you to support the original release, as this is only one of the 13 spine-chilling tales included in this collection. As always, a link to pick up a digital copy for yourself is provided in the description down below. Our story follows Archivist Praefectus Livia Tyrio, a woman both sworn to silence and burdened with a seemingly impossible task. The Emperor's Holy Inquisition has come to the library, and they're demanding a tome hidden deep within the restricted section. This is no simple request, for when the Inquisition issues a command, failure is a death sentence. Many teams of archivists have already been dispatched into the library's depths, yet none have returned. Time is running out, and Livia, now the last remaining archivist and the library's only hope of salvation, must brave the darkness and venture forth with nothing but a candle to light her way. Yet among the endless corridors and cages, the books here do not rest quietly. Some whisper secrets in dead tongues, some bleed like open wounds, and some claw at the mind, demanding not only to be read, but to be entirely consumed. Livia will learn that ink can stain more deeply than blood, and not every light in the darkness is marking the way home. Tonight, my friends, the gates of the library's restricted section are opening just for you. So gather round and listen well as we dive into another tale of madness and horror in the Grimdark Story Hour. But first, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. I don't know if you'll be able to relate to this or not, but it feels like every day I've got too much to do and not enough time to do it. And I know some of y'all have it way worse than me. Trying to balance kids, work, a social life, all while trying to live a healthy and active lifestyle, it's downright overwhelming. That's why for the last few years, I've been using the sponsor of this video, Factor, as my go-to lunch and dinner solution in order to get back some of my me time. If you've never used them before, Factor saves you a ton of time by eliminating cooking, prep time, cleanup, and trips to the grocery store. Their meals are nutritious, delicious, ready in just 2 minutes, and are shipped right to your door. They recently doubled their menu to over 80 different meals with 3 times more weekly options to choose from, so there's something for everyone. Now, personally speaking, I'm the type of guy who loves exercising and eating healthy. I don't have much of a sweet tooth, I love my vegetables, and I've never really been a snacker. My big problem has always been portion control. However, with Factor, that started to change, as their pre-prepared meals helped me learn what an actual portion size really looks like without skimping out on me. I can also personally attest that they've introduced me to a bunch of food I probably wouldn't have tried otherwise. I'm not a vegan or vegetarian and don't plan on converting anytime soon, but I'll tell you what, vegan food, apparently it actually kinda slaps. So if you're like me and you wanna take control of your nutrition and get back some of your hard-earned free time, then head to factor75.com or click on the link below and use code WesHammerFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code WesHammerFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Big thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video. Archivist Praefectus Livia Tyrio ground the heel of her hand into her eye socket, as though to drive wakefulness through her optic nerve and into her brain. Flashes of shifting colored shapes writhed through the darkness behind her eyelid. She had snatched only a handful of hours of sleep since the library had received the Inquisition's demand. She stretched hard enough to crack her spine, though the ache in her shoulders remained unyielding, and continued her search of the overstuffed shelves that lined the room, a servo skull tracking along them with her. They bulged with old books and fragile scrolls, sagging under the weight of the text written by Livia's predecessors in their attempt to document the library's contents. Livia had ransacked it all in search of any indication of the location of the tome the Holy Ordos demanded. Acidic ink had long since burnt the meaning out of the earliest, turning the pages to brittle fretwork. The later accounts were filled with errors and omissions, keyed to reference systems long since abandoned. Countless hours of work had narrowed the tome's whereabouts down to the restricted section. But even that was a vast expanse. She dispatched the news to the searching archivist and continued her work in an attempt to truly pinpoint the tome's location. Activity serving as a bulwark against fevered panic. She pulled a map from the shelves, unrolling the frail parchment on her desk atop the discarded books and charts already splayed across it. The malformed topography spread fresh cracks through the brittle paper. Her own doomed attempts at cartography made up the lowest strata of the accretion of falsehoods on her desk. Every document in the Prefectus's office was misleading to some greater or lesser degree. The library's contents growing too fast, within a structure too vast to be memorized. The already considerable area enclosed within the footprint of the library's walls multiplied many times over by the labyrinth of shelves that folded upon themselves in a geometric maze. The latest map showed the library's main expanse in eye-watering detail. Once she'd oriented herself, Livia skimmed over the intricate network of lines, the ragged nail of a trailing finger covering in seconds what it would take hours to accomplish on foot. The servo skull hovering at her shoulder felt more like a critic than a companion, the eyes of the librarian Majoris watching her progress. She looked to the restricted section. Here, the shelves didn't continue on in their angular runs, but were confined to small squares, representing the cages the books there were held within, the contents proscribed. Her finger began to flick between the reference numbers within each inked box, and at last she found the code she sought, fingertip grinding into the parchment. She checked her notes once again, unnecessarily, for the Inquisition's diktat was seared in her mind. The tome they requested identified by a string of characters. The reference on the map matched it exactly. Livia's relief was but momentary. Finding the location on the map was a minor and uncertain victory, hope lying only in its presumed accuracy. She wasted no time in savoring her fragile triumph, making a hastily sketched copy of the map section in her notebook and running from the cell, the servo skull matching her pace. Livia had lost any track of time as she worked, but knew that many days had elapsed since she'd left the entrance hall. Still reeling from the arrival of the Inquisition's request, the Archivist Majoris had summoned all the archivists that could be spared and dispatched a team into the depths to locate the tome. They'd not returned, nor had the two that followed them. Livia had stopped watching their departures then, leaving others to stand vigil. The glow from the hall seeped into the corridor, but even forewarned, Livia had to shield her eyes from the profusion of candles crowded upon the shrine of the lost, one for every soul consumed by the depths. The library was burning lives to find what the Inquisition sought. Despite the heat rolling off the shrine, Livia couldn't help but shudder. She made a swift obeisance before it. The wingtips of the Aquila she made turned tattered by her chewed nails. A warden made his way towards her across the deserted chamber, dark robes clenched tight about him. Behind him, Livia could see the Inquisition's request displayed upon the gates that barred the entrance to the library proper. Within the thrice-barred eye of the heavy seal at the bottom of the scroll, a skull regarded her with a baleful gaze. "Archivist Praefectus." Barely more than a whisper in the non-hollow space, the warden's voice reached Livia's ears clearly. "The Majoris has gone to prepare. The Inquisition are sending an emissary for the tome. Their acolyte will leave with it, even if it means venturing into the library to rip it from the shelves." Outrage trembled the notebook in Livia's hand. An outsider in the library was tantamount to desecration, no matter the authority commanding it. Their rift with the Mechanicus had saved them from the worst abuse from beyond their walls, but the library had been forever scarred, by the last time an Inquisitor had stepped amongst the shelves. Clenched upon her notebook, her fingers had drained of color. She seized upon a thin hope. The others?
There has been no word from within. They are lost. You are the last upon this side of the gate.
Livia looked again to the shrine, eyes watering from the number of candles. From where she stood, choice seemed a far distant thing, the many threads of duty twisting into a lash that compelled her onwards. She looked upwards to the saints and martyrs painted upon the ceiling. Hanging from the long-dead chandeliers, stalactites of wax formed reproving fingers. She marched towards the gate. I can retrieve the tome. I know where it is. Somewhere within, she tried to find confidence to match her tone.
May the God Emperor guide your steps. He sends his Inquisition, and we have all but failed them.
At the gate, the warden hefted a satchel bulging with large candles and held them out to Livia. Taking them, she put her notebook inside, unhooked the holder from her belt, and lit a candle from the warden's proffered flame. Thus armed, she stepped into the library. The first candelabra stood just beyond the gate, a pale ghost towering out of the darkness. Its ironwork had drowned centuries ago beneath the vast cascades of wax that enveloped it, testament to the countless archivists who had set out from here into the sepulchral depths that lay beyond. Livia pulled a candle from her bag, reversed her stylus, and marked her initials at its base. She lit it and scaled the handholds in the wax monolith to secure it atop the mound of its expired kin. It was a flicker in the darkness to guide her way back, the first of many that would mark her trail. The light revealed only the smallest hint of the Stygian space ahead. The map she had pored over in her office did little to capture the grandeur of the library. Shelves loomed in front of her in serried innumerable ranks, here rising only 2 stories, ladders scaling them. In the distance on either side, the shelves rose higher, spiral staircases accessing balconies which ran their length. The library contained books, journals, correspondence, maps, star charts, manifests, reports, and manuscripts from across all fields. The section on the system's military history alone was vast, filling shelf after groaning shelf. The Great Wing to Livia's right contained duplicates of the Arbites Annals of Law, trial documents and rulings, which were supplemented weekly. To her left, the wing containing the Administratum archives grew by the hour. In places, the shelves were utterly lost beneath piles of paperwork that had been stacked up in the aisles. Makeshift tunnels burrowing through the teetering acclamations lit by rare and precious lumens. Livia raised her candle high, expanding the circle of light surrounding her fractionally. Darkness crowded tight at every side, her own shadow thrown wild and shifting against the floor, anchoring the false knight of the library to her heels. She plunged into the stacks, perturbed by the still unfamiliar presence of the servo skull at her shoulder, past shelves of dark wood with edges rubbed pale by the brushing passage of countless trailing hands. Her course became a weaving zigzag as she made her way deeper into the library, skirting dead ends and impassable stretches of shelves. Livia came to a sudden halt. A tumble of unused candles spilled across her path, one crushed flat by the weight of a descending foot. She struggled to imagine why an archivist would not pause to pick up the scattered candles. Even as she knelt to add them to her own supply, she cast about, looking for any clues as to what had happened, but found none. The servo skull circled, descending in front of her. Livia looked up with a jerk. Its presence, which she had ceased to notice as she traversed the shelves, was suddenly ominous once more. Empty sockets level with her eyes, it stopped, nibs skittering out from below its severed jaw with a chatter to scratch out a message upon the parchment trailing beneath it. It began to write, the darting of its many nibs manifesting the words from the Majoris in ink upon the hanging parchment before they withdrew behind its teeth. He is here. He is coming. He has breached the gate. Find the tome and our salvation, lest we burn. The candle she picked up fell from Livia's numb fingers. It tumbled into the darkness as she scrambled to her feet and started to run. She had expected to have days, maybe a week, in which to achieve her task, not a mere handful of hours. Her mouth turned as dry as the parchment that surrounded her, the panic redolent in the Majoris' words welling up inside her. Her fingers trembled as she rushed to light each candle she left behind as a waymarker. The flames danced, and she feared more than once that she would snuff them out in her haste. She knew she was leaving a trail for her pursuer to follow, but without them to light it, there would be no way back. The servo skull and its trailing invective dogged her steps, as inescapable as whatever emissary of the Inquisition now pursued her to the tome. Livia's desperate pace stuttered as she saw a light up ahead. Her own candle shivered as she contemplated the thought that she had somehow been overtaken and headed off by the Inquisition's acolyte. She forced herself to keep moving, one cold foot at a time, trusting to the God Emperor to protect her and the works under her charge from whatever fate lay ahead. Up ahead, she spied a dark figure collapsed beside a dwindling candle. A far cry from the upright and wrathful instrument of the Inquisition she had expected, she instead found a black-robed warden slumped against the shelves, their candle a guttering stub. Livia made a cautious approach, bolder than she might have been had she not at first imagined that something more frightful lay in wait. The marks of the scourge on her back were a reminder of the punishment for breaking the silence of the library, so she said nothing as she crept closer. She was nearly beside them when she realized that she'd made two mistakes. Firstly, that the warden was dead, only the flickering candlelight giving the body the illusion of lifelike motion. Secondly, that they were not a warden at all. Livia studied the fallen figure. As a novice, she had been sent on heaving slogs to drag back the chanced-upon corpses of lost archivists from amid the stacks, but never a fresh body. What she'd mistaken for a dark warden's robe was in fact the white of an archivist, but filled so tightly with script that it was stained almost black with ink. Letters and symbols drawn onto the fabric, bearing little resemblance to the high and low Gothic or native dialects which Livia was familiar with. The servo skull hovered in close, its nib skittering once, but writing nothing. Its open pages so heavily suffused with ink that Livia had at first failed to pick it out. A notebook nestled in the archivist's lap. Their words had exceeded the boundaries of the paper, spilling onto the robes and yet further on. Where the cloth proved insufficient, they had begun to inscribe words upon their own skin, their stylus gouging letters into their flesh. Curlicues of excised tissue hung from the self-inflicted wounds. It was not just ink that stained their robes, but also dried blood. The corpse bled as white as the robe should have been. The stylus was locked in a death grip in their hand, the nib blunted and buckled. They had taken so long at their task that the first words cut into their skin had begun to scab over. Where their flesh stretched thin over bone and tendon, the body's working could be seen revealed within the deeply carved letters. Livia found herself massaging her forearm, nursing her unbroken flesh in sympathy, even as she leant in closer to read the blood-flecked words in the notebook, the origin of the cascade of ink and madness. She devoured what small fraction of the text she could understand before the script transmuted into an unrecognizable tumult. They were expedition notes, a custom Livia had never practiced, that roughly recorded the archivist's path, clearly continuing from a previous page. The notebook stated, "The new route works nearly as well in practice as in theory. Thank the Emperor. The cages are not far from here. I fear I am lost amid the iron. I move in circles. I cannot find the way forward. There is light ahead that is not my own. I see him. He has the tome. We are saved. Emperor be praised. Why hasn't he returned with it? He breaks the vows. He speaks within these walls. He says my fate is written in the tome, that I must read what will become of me." After that, the unknown script began spilling onwards and outwards. Livia felt compelled to follow the writing, captivated by the task of trying to decipher it, and in doing so, comprehend what had driven the archivist to such lengths. She leant closer yet, contorting herself in place, trying to follow the meandering lines of text. Hot wax spilled from the lip of her candle holder and splashed onto her wrist. She winced at the heat, and with that, the mesmeric allure of the script was broken. Her eyes were tired and dry. Her candle was burnt down far further than it ought to be. She had wasted precious time she could ill afford to lose. Livia looked at the body with regret, and then averted her gaze from the tangled symbols. Mouthing a silent prayer to the Emperor for the dead, she set off deeper into the darkness, pushing away the desire to mourn and the gnawing curiosity the words carved into the corpse's flesh had awakened. Whatever madness had overtaken them had ridden them a long way. Livia thanked the Emperor for whatever twist of fate had put them in her path. She now knew that the tome was where she had expected it to be, within the cages. All else could be dealt with upon its retrieval. Livia just needed to keep ahead of the acolyte and offer it up to them. Mercy was not how the Inquisition and its agents rewarded failure. Without some means of bargaining, she had no expectation of surviving an encounter. Retrieving the book might be some token to tip the scales of judgment in the favor of the library. Her eyes on the shelves, Livia felt the ashes crumble beneath her feet before she saw them. Her feet ground crisp, charred pages into fragments with each step as she waded through the drift of ashes that had gathered between the bookshelves. She consoled herself with the knowledge that the damage was irreversible long before this final act of desecration. Her cracked lips mouthed silent prayers. The aisle of shelves ceased abruptly, and the light of Livia's candle was suddenly flung wide. But it failed to illuminate anything more than a fraction of the vast emptiness of the lacuna yawning before her. She leapt back as though on the edge of a precipice, clinging to the end of the last shelf. She hastened to place a fresh candle into the sconce that had been crudely nailed there. The weak flame did nothing to push back the encroaching darkness. Livia gathered her nerve and headed out into the unnatural void, pushing through ankle-deep mounds formed of the blackened and fragile remains of books, stirring up the smell of smoke, occasionally finding an intact corner or spine with her bare toes. The servo skull scudded low, trailing parchment scuffing the ash. Her progress took her across the epicenter of the destruction. Here, the ash thinned, revealing a vast scorch mark upon the cracked flagstones, stretching dozens of feet across. The last time an Inquisitor had cause to enter the library, they had made a pyre to destroy works they deemed heretical. Shelves had been felled by axe and chainsword, and 24 archivists had been consigned to the flames atop the books, keeping their vows of silence even as they burned. It was distant centuries ago, but the wound was still fresh, an indelible mark against their emperor-given charge as guardians. Livia could imagine the fierce heat and the smell as paper and flesh alike were consumed. The shelves on the far side of the lacuna were cracked by heat and blackened by soot. Livia scurried for their sheltering confines. The first candelabra was a little way in, the stone of the floor still showing marks where it had been dragged into a fresh position so as to avoid the sacrilege of kindling fresh flame within the lacuna. There were those amongst Livia's colleagues who maintained, somewhere within the uncharted periphery of the library, their own shrine to the lost, commemorating the books in their care that had been destroyed. They placed their candles upon it, but lit not a single one. She looked back at the last candle she had left to mark her path, its tiny flame nearly lost to the distance across the lacuna's expanse, and started as it was momentarily obscured. Someone had passed between her and the flame, someone who held no candle of their own. Her body felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the library. Some quirk of the momentary silhouette told her that it was not an archivist, that it could only be the acolyte of the Inquisition who had caught up with her, standing upon the border of their distant predecessor's atrocity. Livia turned and fled, nearly fumbling her candle in her haste. The precious flame that lit her way flickered, agitated by the swiftness of her passage. Her robe flapped at her ankles, the servo skull tight behind her. She passed 2 candelabra before she dared to stop to mark her way, shifting from foot to foot, her breath coming in sawing gasps. She had little choice but to light her way back, despite the sure knowledge that it laid a path for her pursuer. She told herself she could keep ahead of the acolyte, and that maybe, if she could retrieve the tome, she could yet appease them. It was a hope as small and flickering as the flame she lit, and it withered when she looked back and saw the figure pass before the previous candelabra. She veered down a row of shelves and took 2 more turns, desperately glancing to either side to find some landmark upon the shelves by which to navigate. Looking back, she saw through a gap in the ranks of books that the acolyte was closing on her. The candle she had left behind had marked her path, but the one she carried was making her easy to track. Livia acted without thought, the strangling grip of present danger overwhelming the long-held taboo, and blew her candle out. The inky darkness snapped closed around her, consuming her utterly. The shelf she clung to, her only anchor in the world. Bereft of sight, she labored to hear the approach of the acolyte, struggling to make out anything beyond the sound of her own hammering heart and the rasp of air from her heaving lungs. The pale shape of the servo skull hovered above her, a mocking phantom of the sun she hadn't seen since the commencement of her administratum service. There was a whisper of a booted foot scuffing stone. Panic set her running once more. Unseeing, she crashed into a shelf, the useless candle and holder torn from her hand to clatter away across the flagstones. Without the candle, growing hunger and the ache in her limbs became Livia's only way of marking time. Progress became measured by the number of shelves she stumbled her way along, tethered to them by an outstretched hand. She nearly broke her silence when her hands encountered iron bars stretched across the shelves, flakes of rust coming away beneath her fingers. The bars kept the books locked behind them, inaccessible to anyone without the correct key. They were a lesser form of the cages that she sought and meant in the vast geography of the library that she was adjacent to her goal. Fingers trailing on rusted iron, she quickened her pace, slowing when she saw a hint of light ahead. The shelves were so wide apart she couldn't span the aisle with her arms outstretched and made a broad corner ahead of her, the light emanating from just beyond. Livia came cautiously around the corner, eyes watering at the sudden intensity of the light. Illuminated by candle flame, she saw an archivist kneeling amidst a slew of books that had been scattered across the floor. He ripped the securing bars free to enact this desecration, the mottled ironwork discarded amid the tumble of ancient volumes. As Livia watched, the archivist tore pages from a book and stuffed them into his mouth with both hands, chewing with manic intensity, letting the stripped binding fall atop a mound of others he'd defiled. The sound of it made her hands crawl up the side of her head to shield her ears. Spittle and sodden, macerated fragments of paper spilled from his lips. He didn't stop or seem to pause for breath, but just kept tearing pages free from between covers and forcing them into his grinding jaws, smearing his fingers, lips, and chin with ink. He swallowed, choking the mass down, eyes rolling back. Saliva dribbled down his chin onto his robes, blackened by ink, reddened by the blood leaking from lacerations that scoured the flesh around and inside his mouth. Cheeks distended by the pages he had gorged upon and bearded with effluvia. The man was unrecognizable to Livia. She was unutterably glad of that small mercy. In the fervor to devour more pages, he had dislodged his own teeth with spittle-soaked fingers, forcing them out of the way, uprooting incisors and canines, crunching down on them with the remainder. She risked a cautious step closer, pressing herself against the farthest side of the row of shelves so hard that the cold iron of the retaining bars scraped along her spine. She needed the candle that lit the abhorrent spectacle that the archivist had abandoned so casually, forgetting it upon the edge of a shelf as if it were no value here. The servo skull hovered along in the center of the aisle. It was a distraction that could give her away. She snatched it from the air with both hands, wrestling it close to her, index fingers hooked into its eye sockets. The tips of the nibs stabbed into the finger she curled under its jaw as she fought the suspensors that kept it aloft. She was nearly level with the archivist when he abruptly stopped, the digits of one hand still lost within his mouth. Upon his other hand, Livia could see the ragged stump of a finger, bitten off in his eagerness to consume more books. Blood oozed sluggishly from torn skin. Her determination to stand firm nearly withered in anticipation of a flailing lunge and the rending bite of his ruinous jaw locking down upon the meat of her arm. The archivist convulsed suddenly, the movement making Livia start, almost sending her racing back into the darkness. He doubled over so violently that his head cracked against the floor. He vomited, not the mass of paper that Livia was expecting, but an endless, silky black pool of ink that spread to surge against the books that lay around him. Even racked by continuing spasms, the archivist tried to scoop up the liquid with his maimed hands and force it back down. The growing puddle stained the gray ash of the lacuna that clung to Livia's bare feet, sticky and carrying the disturbing warmth of body heat. Livia released the servo skull and snatched the candle in the holder that the archivist had abandoned. Shielding the precious flame, she fled, the satchel of fresh candles thumping on her thigh. The servo skull straining along behind her, hanging parchment streaming. The looming shapes of candelabra reared out of the dark at her, nearly bringing her to a skidding halt with the thought that she had been caught, or that her flight had brought her circling back to the bibliovore. She dreaded crossing the trail of her own ink-stained feet. The further she fled, the less likely that seemed, the chance of following the shelves to her intended destination in the restricted section growing greater. her mind filled with the potential routes out of the library, or those that would take her into a far distant part of its depths. She nearly veered from her path, but held her course. She trusted to faith to keep her safe from whatever malignancy had destroyed the other archivists. Flight would only delay the inevitable. Without her intervention, the Inquisition would surely damn the library with the mark of failure and incompetence, and see the building and all within purged with flame and sword. Futile as it might be, she pressed on, feet aching, exhaustion chewing on her bones. She came upon the larger cages suddenly, tumbling out from between the shelves and into the restricted section. She sagged against the bars in relief, gathering her scattered composure. The cages were uniform, made of bars set into the stone floor, rearing up over twice Livia's height. Within them, some shelves were stuffed to overflowing with books and curios, while others held but a single volume. The lock upon each cage was finessed with a plate that bore the seal of the last archivist to access it, pressed into pale candle wax, obscured by dust. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her notebook and leafed through its pages, searching for the sketched map she'd made of the layout of this section of the library. The words written in the dead archivist's notebook came back to her. Whatever madness had turned their mind septic had started here. Livia had been able to ignore that thus far, focusing solely on finding the cages. Now that she walked amongst them, she began to fixate on what might lie ahead, tempering conjured nightmares against the presumption that it could be no worse than the wrath of a disappointed Inquisition. She drowned out the voices before they could rise in eternal cacophony, focusing herself upon the words of a hymn of devotion to the Golden Throne. Livia came to a candelabra and reached inside her satchel, pulling out a candle from her dwindling supply. As she pressed the base of the candle into the wax that surmounted the candelabra, she felt warmth beneath her fingers. Her fogged brain took a moment to process its significance. The warmth meant a candle not long dead, that she was following in the wake of another archivist, that perhaps by some twist of fate or design of the Emperor, she had a chance of completing her mission. She glanced frantically about, eyes straining to pick out any sign of another's presence. She caught sight of the next candle just as it stuttered and died, a faltering pinprick in the darkness. She moved towards it as fast as her tired legs would allow and reached it just in time for her fingers to dip into wax that was still molten. She made out the next candle clearly, reaching it moments before it was snuffed out. The procession of guttering candles led Livia deeper and deeper into the maze of cages. Ahead, she could make out a stronger glow through the iron lattice of the cages. Livia made towards the light, but as she drew closer, she'd realized she'd mistaken its scale. Far closer than it appeared, it wasn't the glow of a candelabra crowned with tapers, but something much larger. She quailed at the thought of a conflagration, but ran forward in the hope of somehow dousing the flames. A figure stood at the periphery of the blaze, outline blurred by the light lapping around it. As she began to discern the detail within the glow, she saw that the fire was not one continuous inferno, but that it was made up of innumerable candles, rising in a rearing mass of wax to the bars of the cage and around the open door, the sheer volume of them giving the illusion of a monstrous fire. Upon the open door of the cage, she could see red wax running and dripping like blood, a sign that it had been locked under an inquisitorial seal. Shielding her eyes against the searing illumination, Livia saw that the silhouetted figure was that of another archivist. He turned to her, his empty eye sockets filled with darkness deeper than any other within the walls of the library. He held an open book in his hands as though she had interrupted his reading. Livia had no doubt it was the tome she had been searching for. She drew closer, free hand outstretched towards the book, fingers almost brushing the cover. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. A voice behind her sounded like the booming declaration of an affronted demigod.
"In the name of the divine Emperor, and by the power of the Holy Inquisition, I name thee heretics and maleficarum. By thine actions you are condemned to death. By my actions you will die."
Livia tumbled backwards, pushed by the archivist's hand on her shoulder. As she fell, two tiny, piercingly bright flashes of light passed over her. The archivist staggered, ember-ringed holes in his robes framing cauterized gouges drilled into the meat of his chest. Livia struck the floor, her satchel of candles shrugging from her shoulder to spill across the ground. Some bone-deep instinct urged her back to her feet as the acolyte closed on her. Luck alone had kept the candle in her holder aflame and in her hand. The raised blade of the acolyte's sword glowed with reflected light. As Livia scrambled backwards to avoid the descending blow, the servo skull swerved between them. The acolyte's sword caught the skull, shearing it apart, scattering splinters of ancient bone, riven parchment, and a spray of nibs, peppering them both with ink. Livia's retreating heels met the archivist's fallen body, lying amid the candles at the mouth of the cage, and she realized she had nowhere else to run. When Livia lunged, the acolyte's eyes followed the candle in her right hand. She thrust the ink-darkened stylus in her left hand through the back of his wrist. His blade tumbled from deadened fingers to strike the floor with a deafening peal. He snarled in wordless fury, exchanging the las pistol in his other hand with a fistful of her robe, the gun swinging from its chain at his wrist. Despite Livia's stylus still lodged in his arm, he snatched her candle, tearing it from the holder and driving it towards her eye. Unable to get away, her world shrank to the size of the dancing flame. There was the sizzle and stink of burning hair as her eyelashes and eyebrow were singed to nothing. The smell of her own charred skin mixed with the scent of a snuffed candle. Lost in pain, she choked on her own silence. Wax and blood ran down her cheek like tears. Livia flailed, the empty candle holder catching her attacker in the side of the face, its spike driving into yielding meat and rebounding from bone. Once, twice, before jerking free of her grip. The acolyte still held onto her, a fist twisted in her robes. Weakened but tenacious yet, Livia tried to force him back, striking him wildly again and again with fists and open hands until something broke beneath her blows, fragments of its cutting edge digging into her palm. The sudden scent of holy oil overwhelmed that of her burnt flesh. She was abruptly released and cast away. Livia caught herself on the bars of the cage door, her attacker glistening in the candlelight, oil soaking him from chest to boots. The broken neck of a glass vial dangling from a cord around his throat, a shard of broken glass wedged into his armor, dripping with his blood. Livia grabbed at one of the hundreds of candles beside her and hurled it, even as the acolyte raised his pistol and fired. The flame of Livia's thrown candle reached out, grasping for a victim. The acolyte was engulfed as it struck him. He beat fruitlessly at the flames, then turned and ran. A figure wholly wreathed in fire, screaming and throwing wild shadows into the dark as he tore through the aisles between the cages, dripping flame. The acolyte's final shot had struck Livia, but she didn't feel it and could not smell the further immolation of her own flesh. The desire to retrieve the tome and complete the task she had been set upon animated her for a moment more. With her remaining eye, she regarded the dead archivist. He lay circled by candles, framed by iron and flame, the tome closed on his chest, covering his wounds. Above the corpse, the air twisted, and with a silent tearing, reality unhinged itself. A rift in the fabric of space flexed and shivered. It blossomed in the air, spilling effulgent light, alive with a wildly shifting marbling of all the colors Livia had ever seen. Candles started to melt in the intensity of the light spilling from the portal, their forms beginning to slump and flow. The wax that had run down Livia's face from her destroyed eye liquefied, dripping to the floor, colored by blood. Bubbles rose in the growing pool of wax as it started to boil on the cold stone, unmoored wicks floating in it, still aflame. The wax sizzled and burned, issuing bitter smoke, and suddenly ignited. At the center of the conflagration, the book remained unharmed. Livia saw the ghost of half-formed things in the dancing flames. The combination of duty and curiosity that had compelled her for so long gripped her one last time. She stepped forward into the flames, untouched by them, and took hold of the tome. Grasping the grimoire to her chest, she took another step, and the portal shivered forward to consume her.